This is the On Target Preparedness Podcast with David Hesselmeyer. This podcast is devoted to discussing the challenges, proven methods, and success stories in emergency management for all types of agencies. Here is your host, David Hesselmeyer.
Hello and welcome to the On Target Preparedness Podcast. This is David Hesselmeyer, your host. We are coming at you from the On Target Preparedness Studios in Harnett County, North Carolina, and it is August the 3rd of 2018. I think we've got a good program for you coming up today, so we look forward to talking to you about some things. So it has been a little while since we have recorded a podcast. I'll be honest with you, that is 100% my fault, but there's a good reason behind it. Some of you who have are followers of ours on the On Target Preparedness Facebook page have seen that my wife Amanda, daughter Reagan, and I have adopted a son. He was born June 23rd in Arizona, in Glendale. And so we welcomed Arizona Floyd Hesselmeyer to our family on June 23rd, and a little bit before that, and since then we have been dealing with a newborn and all the paperwork and all the things associated with that. But we are happy to say we got a young, healthy baby boy, and he is growing and doing all the fun things that he should be doing at a month old now. So for those of you who have prayed for us through that process, we appreciate it. It has been a great process, and we're happy that he is a part of our family. So the next thing I want to do in taking a couple minutes is, you know that we always like to give a kudos out and just really bring some insight to those who may or may not be seen as the work that they've been doing. But I think most anybody who has been keeping up with the news or reading the paper or anything like that has seen that our brother and sister firefighters in California are really battling a lot of massive wildfires. Unfortunately, there have been several line of duty deaths in those wildfires, and I just want to give a kudos / ask for prayers for them. A lot of these people, unfortunately, are battling wildfires where they live and are losing their own homes. Their families having to evacuate and not being able to see them for a while. So I do want to give a huge kudos for those people who are really being resilient and working hard to protect those even when they are affected directly, and ask for everybody just to say some prayers for them and hope that they can get this handled as soon as possible, and then have some time to recover mentally, physically, and personally from these things. So the next thing we want to just discuss real quick is, as we always do, is a few things that we've been doing, and we picked a few just out of a lot of different work that we are doing. First, we have recently been in Franklin County, and we did a hurricane tabletop exercise. Graham Bundy, our vice president, led and moderated a hurricane tabletop, which had emergency services, health department, DSS, and some other agencies involved with that, putting them through an actual hypothetical hurricane and how that would affect them and what they may have to be doing and making decisions on as they would go through the start of it, then through the response phase, and then all the way through more towards the recovery mitigation phase. So that is definitely something. There was a lot of good feedback from it already, and we're in the process of finalizing the after action report, and I'll be sending that out, and hopefully the agencies involved will start taking the improvement plan and start building upon it. We've also had staff teaching the ICS 3 and 400 courses. We're starting to see a an uptick in those requests, which is great. We have recently added one of my mentors. This is actually just a dream to add a mentor to your staff, and I'm happy to say that Gordon Dino, who is the Director of Wilson County Emergency Management, has come on board doing a little bit of work for us and helping us teach some of these ICS courses. He is just a grandiose instructor, very well knowledgeable, very well liked, and really can provide that information and the education to anybody, no matter what background, whether they be emergency management, firefighter, paramedic, EMT, health department, or just an ordinary citizen who's interested in learning more. Finally, we've done some additional active assailant, active shooter functional exercises. Back about a month ago, we ran Harnett County Health Department and DSS through an active assailant functional exercise. We actually had a couple staff members who acted as active shooters and to see how they would react. It went very well, even to the point where we have been getting requests for more of that within the county government and seeing about doing that for their other agencies. So we're really excited about that. So there's a little bit about what we're doing. So we're going to start heading towards more of the topic aspect of the podcast. And so now it's time to welcome those who are on the podcast with me. So let me start out by welcoming back Graham Bundy, who is the vice president of the company, and y'all have heard a lot from him, and some of y'all have definitely gotten to know him. So, Graham's great to have you on the podcast again.
Thank you. And
everybody's going to get a little special treat on this podcast, as we do have a newcomer. If you've read the information about what this topic is about, we have a newcomer on the podcast today with us. He started approximately a month ago with us full time. Actually, I won't give too much of his information away, but he comes to us from the wonderful state of Oklahoma and is working with us as an emergency management planner. But we welcome Derek Norton to OTP as a staff member for hopefully a long tenure, and glad to have him here on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. And yes, I moved here at the last week of June to join On Target Preparedness. I finished up my last semester at Oklahoma State University, soon to be getting my master's in fire and emergency management. I've got 2 beautiful children and another one on the way in October. I've got a beautiful wife that is a ICU nurse with Duke Health. Spent 4 years in the Marine Corps as an infantry section leader, and then did a little bit of wildland firefighting for the state of California, and decided to continue my education. Got my bachelor's in political science and emergency management, went on and got my master's in fire and emergency management, and luckily enough I found On Target Preparedness and was afforded the opportunity to come out here and learn from David and Graham and see what all's going on out here and impart some of my wisdom as well.
Great. Well, as I said, it's great to have Derek on the staff. And Graham and I have talked in length, and we will ask everybody, please don't hold it against him that he was in the Marine Corps. Everybody does make bad decisions every once in a while. But we're happy to have Derek, and of course are proud of his service to the country, no matter what branch it is. So let's jump into it. So the topic and the title of today's podcast is HSEEP, MYTEP, and TEPW. What does all these letters mean? So, of course, being in emergency services, emergency management, and preparedness, we always look at our ICS classes and say we need to have plain language, common terminology and stuff, and then, of course, we have these acronyms. So, Graham, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what does those 3 acronyms themselves stand for? What's HSEEP, what's MYTEP, what's TEPW?
Well, I think it's appropriate to start with the HSEEP. So it's the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, and I think in simplistic general terms, I guess, it's just the framework that we use as we develop and conduct training and exercises. And then chronologically, you have the TEPW, which is a training and exercise planning workshop, which then one of the products that comes out of the TEPW is the MYTEP, which is a multi-year training and exercise plan, usually being a 3-year sliding window. Absolutely.
I think it's very interesting to see. You know, we hear it and go around, and actually as a question in Derek's final interview was the question of, you know, whether HSEEP was required or not. And we've, of course, found out, and Derek was right, that, you know, HSEEP is not a requirement, but HSEEP is a pretty efficient framework to get this done. Wouldn't you say, Derek?
Yes, sir, for sure.
So the purpose of HSEEP is for us to be able to do our best to coordinate, plan, and do all these exercises for the best of our abilities. Because, I mean, how many incidents are we going to have where there's only one single agency responding, right? I mean, most of the time when something happens, a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, we're talking multiple agencies all having a piece of a puzzle. So it's important for that. So when we go to a TEPW, a training and exercise planning workshop, what we're doing is sitting down with those people that are coming together to plan together, and we start talking about commonalities. So one of the things we'll be talking about in that is, of course, where we got to start out with is the issue of what kind of hazards and risks do we have. So why don't we talk about that for a second? So how do we go about looking at that in a TEPW to determine, you know, how our priorities match up?
I think each jurisdiction's a little bit different on how they. We've talked about in previous podcasts. There's a whole lot of different methodologies out there that jurisdictions or agencies use to identify risks and hazards, and I guess how you get to that, the journey can be a little bit different for each one of them. But ultimately, you come out with a hazard identification or risk identification result or a report that identifies those hazards or risks that are most prevalent or important to that agency. And I think, given in a world of limited resources, you use that as a frame to frame the discussion as you discuss what training and exercise priorities the county has, because you try to focus on those that pose the greatest risk.
Absolutely. So we're definitely looking at more of the high risk, high vulnerability, high frequency type, you know, events when we're doing this, because of the fact, like you said, we do have those limited resources for that. So what is another thing that, or tell us a little bit more about the TEPW and what all are we discussing while we're there? What kind of things should we be prepared for if we're asked to come and participate in something like this?
Well, I think, there's a general framework for a TEPW. We discussed just a second ago about identified hazards and risks, but I think usually the departure point, the first point of discussion, is typically those events that the participants in the planning workshop, those training events or those exercises that they've conducted in the past. Because I think taking those two things, you take a hazard identification and then what have we already done, and the results of those training and exercises, that really shapes the rest of the discussion.
Absolutely.
So if I was coming, TEPWs can be large meetings or small meetings. Sometimes they're run by county EM managers and they bring in multi-agencies. But if I were to be coming to a meeting, to a TEPW, that would be something I would be prepared to discuss in detail, is what have I done in the last 6 to 12 months and how did it go?
Absolutely. And so one of the things when we do that is we've also got to know from our agency what kind of requirements we have, right? And so, Derek, where can we find, when we're looking at what we have to do, how do we come up with what we have to do for training and exercises?
Look at specifically for On Target Preparedness, you have multiple resources with what's set forth with the National Preparedness Goal and FEMA's HSEEP, their templates, what we can base off our training. We can use those templates. We also have the North Carolina Public Health Preparedness and Response for health departments. We can do, they have 15 priorities set forth that we know that each health department or county is supposed to at least meet these requirements, and therefore we can plan out 3 years in advance for as far as what priorities that particular agency needs. We can incorporate into the plan based off the priorities set forth by PHP&R.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's in essence what we're, where we're starting to lead is that, where our requirements, where our risks and everything start leading us down the same path together.
Yeah, and with many of our clients, our regulatory agency being PHP&R, you have concrete stipulated requirements in the agreement addendum that lays out you must do X, Y, and Z. And then also state puts out their regional work plans, depending on which region the counties fall into. Each work plan is a little bit different, but that work plan specifically lays out goals and objectives that the state would like counties to work on, and then you can try to work that into your TEPU as best as possible. Absolutely.
And every, most all agencies that have emergency exercises has some type of regulatory body over them that explains it. We look at, public health in North Carolina, we start talking about public health preparedness response, or PHP&R, as y'all have indicated. We talk about emergency management in North Carolina. We've got North Carolina Emergency Management that stipulates how many exercises that they have to do every year. You got CMS regulated facilities with CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, that says this is how many you have to do. So there's a lot of those out there, and so we've already established there's a need to plan together because we're probably going to respond together, and then now we're sitting there saying, well, now not only do that, but we probably have some very similar requirements. For example, emergency management in North Carolina has to have, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 3 exercises a year. Well, public health has to have 1 exercise a year. It's not designated as what it has to be, but it just has to be an exercise. So there's a place right there to begin that. So when we're talking about the TEPU, what are some documents that we need to maintain for that? What are we going to make sure that we have saved from that? And then what is our goal? What is our product at the end of a TEPU, the meeting itself?
I think 2 things come to mind. Obviously, we discussed the agreement addendums, and our auditing agencies require documentation of a TEPU. It's one of our agreement addendum requirements that we conduct a TEPU annually. So out of that, obviously, you'd have to have documentation of a sign-in sheet on who attended the TEPU, and then minutes to go along with it. So those are usually 2 of the items we use to confirm that we conducted the TEPU within this 12-month window. Out of the other end, there's obviously, you can use the minutes, but maybe in a larger sense, there are things that come out of the TEPU that you use to create your MYTEP. And generally, we talked about training priorities and those things that we wanted to accomplish over those 1 to 3 years. But also, I think you come up with, and when we get into the discussion of MYTEP, we'll talk about it, but the priorities, goals, and objectives for that agency, that's front and center on the MYTEP. Well, that comes out of the TEPU. These are what that agency wants to focus on, and then that becomes front and center of your MYTEP.
Absolutely. So, some very basic documents. We're not talking about something that has to be some type of strange rocket science to do. We're talking very simplistic documents to record and keep up with, for that. But it leads to some very important information for sure with those objectives and things like that and priorities you're mentioning. So MYTEP stands for Multi-Year Training Exercise Plan. So this document, like Graham just said, is something that comes out of us meeting together at a TEPW, and we start building it from there. Now, one thing that we've already discussed about HSEEP as a whole, but with a MYTEP, is a MYTEP, Derek, something that if we put an exercise on this month that we have to do it?
No, it's essentially guidelines saying, hey, within this time frame, this is some of the stuff we're looking for. How can we make it work within the limited time that we have? So no, you do not have to follow it verbatim. However, it gives you an idea of what's to come, what needs to be looked at, and how can you fit it in with what's there.
Absolutely. And I think that's important is that because we get a lot of people that don't want to be involved with a TEPU and a MYTEP because they see a schedule and they think, I don't know if I can commit to that. Now, the people that we want at the TEPU, we want them to be able to commit their agency to planning together for training exercises. But just because we start developing a MYTEP, this document, doesn't mean that it is set in stone, it's concrete driven, it's in place that 3 years from now we're going to have that exercise. And so we need to be very vocal with people about that this is a guideline. This is us saying we have to plan together, we have similar agreements, requirements, those kind of things. Let's work together to do that.
Yeah, I think, when you look and you work with MYTEPs and you have those TEPUs into MYTEPs, I look at MYTEPs as just being a written acknowledgement of your goals and objectives. That, hey, you'll sit down with people and you'll get in a room and they'll say, we really want to do a sheltering exercise soon. So you put it on the MYTEP. Well, then life gets in the way. You have a hurricane or you have some other sort of real world event. Well, everything slides. But then you can always go back to the MYTEP and say, we really still want to get that sheltering exercise done. So it's a written reminder of those things you talked about 10 months ago and a TEPU to go, well, that's still a priority. Let's try to get it done. I'd say that when it comes to training, the MYTEP's usually pretty solid. Well, we always do our fit testing in this month. We always do our radio testing here and our annual training here. Those things are usually pretty solid. But when it comes to exercises, things tend to move left or right a little bit.
Absolutely. And that's totally fine. There's not. I do not know of any regulatory agency that has came in and faulted anybody for moving it left or right, because that's what it is. This is a guide. I almost wish they would call it a multi-year training exercise guide instead of a plan. For that purpose. Because of the fact, we've seen it. I think y'all can both agree with me. We have people who are turned off by coming and participating in this process because they see those things put down, and they're not meant for that. So, go ahead.
I think it's a lot like a business plan, right? If you're working 5 years out, there's a lot of eraser involved. But I think when it comes to the MYTEP, 12 months out, usually your 12-month out calendar, the first of the 3 years of the MYTEPs tends to be pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't slide much at that point, but I think anybody who's operating on a 3-year plan understands year 3 tends to be a little bit fluid.
Absolutely. And one of the things that this is not a specific HSEEP guideline, but is a as I call them, a Davidism, which is kind of what I believe. And that is, you'll hear a lot of people that will say that they'll do a TEPU every year, or maybe they don't. But that all they'll do with the MYTEP is basically drop a year off of it and add another calendar year. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if that's the way you see it. But I want to be very vocal on that. One of the things that I believe is that you should have an official, tried and true, in-depth TEPU at least every 5 years. because in my personal opinion, I believe that after 3, you start sitting there, especially if you're following, you've been able to meet most of your guidelines in there. You should start sitting there and actually having an official talk about, have we made this a strength enough that there's another priority now that sits in place of this others. We talked on different podcasts about how over time we have to relook at our jurisdictional risk assessment and how things change. And I think that that's one of those things. If we start doing constant training, we start doing exercise, we start seeing that we're really efficient in an area that was a weakness and a priority, then that may start falling off and another priority come up, and stuff like that. And I think that, taking a year off and adding another year for a couple years is a fine thing to do. But after about 5, in my personal opinion, I would say it's time to sit down. We really, really need to get back down in the weeds of that. What do y'all think?
Well, I think each jurisdiction is just a little bit different, right? That's North Carolina in a nutshell. That each county's participants is different. So to your point, I think many out there are doing a full-blown multi-agency TEPW with all the partnering agencies, and they're doing it every year, and they're creating a solid 3-year document every year. And then other agencies are not. They're doing these TEPWs in-house with just management staff. So I think it really, you have to, as far as when it comes to OTP, we really have to look at each one individually and tailor how we do TEPWs and MYTEPs to that specific agency.
What do you think, Derek?
I would agree, and I think outside of what base objectives you want to work on and what weaknesses you want to build up, there's also the issue of turnover rate. So who's coming in, new employees, who's retiring, who left, and it's ensuring that you're keeping everybody in the whole agency up to speed and not just focusing on what weaknesses were there 2 years ago, but what about all those employees that weren't even part of the original planning process.
Yeah, that's a great thing to say for sure. So now we talked a little bit about the TEPU and the MYTEP and where it takes us. So let's start talking about exercises. And I know that we, as a company with On Target Preparedness, work very, very hard to ensure that we follow HSEEP because of the fact that we do believe in the guidelines and how it works for everything. So let's say that we're going to plan a functional or full scale exercise. How are we going to start doing that? Where do we start?
Well, I mean, you have the HSEEP circle, the planning cycle. I think that typically the first place 1 year operating off the objectives and the priorities of the health department or whatever department you're working with. So given that parameter, that these are the things that we want to work on, I think the first step and the departure point should always be the evaluation of previously conducted training. And looking back on those, and everyone's guilty of it at some point, of taking an A or an after action report or review and improvement plan and putting it on a shelf and not looking at it. But that's usually the best place to start is when's the last time we conducted this? If you're committed to doing a shelter functional exercise, when's the last time we conducted this and what was the outcome? Absolutely. So if I were to go about developing an exercise or a training, I'm always looking at what have we done in the past, what have we done well, what do we need to work on, and that's going to help you develop some goals or objectives for that training exercise.
So then let me ask you this, and I'll ask y'all before I give you my opinion to see what your thoughts are. So what comes first, goals and objectives or a scenario?
Well, for me, goals and objectives has to be. Whenever we sit down with clients, maybe the very, very first meeting, one of the first questions we always ask is, what do you hope to get out of this? Not what are you thinking, what kind of exercise do you want to do? we always ask, what do you hope to get out of this? So personally, for me, it's always goals and objectives, because we can accomplish those goals and objectives through multiple scenarios, and we find the best scenario that fits your ultimate objective. But I always like to start with what is that client, what does that agency or department want to get out of this, and then we'll find the best avenue for that. But,
just to reiterate, though, it's important to note that most of the agencies we're working with already know what their threats and hazards are, so that their goals align with what they should be. You know, if you have some newcomer come in there who's not really for sure about the area or anything like that, and then they have these goals and ideas that don't really line up with the threats and hazards that are faced, then I think that's a different issue. But Graham's right. I think the individuals present are aware of what threats and hazards they face, so their goals align with.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, I agree wholeheartedly with y'all. And one of the reasons, too, outside of what y'all have already mentioned, that's important to me about why we started that way is because of the fact that, especially since we've talked about that most exercises are multi-agency, because we do respond with multiple agencies, it is so much easier for us to combine those requirements basically for a money saving or for a money saving aspect, but also for a realistic aspect, because if we can sit there and do one full scale exercise, and we're going to sit there and can realistically make a scenario that is, Derek, as you said, a risk or hazard for that jurisdiction, but it tests 5 or 6 agencies' objectives without making it a monstrosity, then that is only going to be good for both aspects of money saver. So, everybody's kind of sharing the load of the cost, whether it's a contractor or whether it's just doing it in-house, as well as making it a more realistic type exercise, for that point.
I think every major tabletop or functional exercise we have recently done, one of the objectives has always been interagency cooperation. And I think that's really been a theme federal government down, is working with partners, and many CMS in particular, it's even a regulatory requirement that you have to reach out and work with partners. So reaching out, interagency cooperation has always been an objective that clients have established with us. And then, like you said, when we start these planning meetings, these things can sometimes get away from us because law enforcement EMS might want these 3 objectives. Well, the health department wants these 3 objectives. Well, the long-term care and assisted living has these 3 objectives. And so that's why I think, to the earlier point, those goals and objectives is what matters, because you're going to have to try to find a scenario that accomplishes all 15 different objectives. And you never really know. You can't walk into a meeting saying, we're going to do this exercise. It doesn't work like that, because you don't know what their objectives are.
Absolutely. Now, Graham, you just brought up a good point. So, one of the things that we do in planning and exercises, of course, is we have planning meetings. So what kind of meetings are these, and what do we do? What are we discussing? What are we trying to get out of that?
Well, you have those initial, mid, final planning meetings. I think those are benchmarks that people traditionally use. The scenario, the complexity of the exercise can drive how many of those that you do. But in general, at a minimum, even for maybe a simplistic tabletop or discussion-based exercise, you're going to do an initial and a final planning meeting. Out of the initial, it's in many ways, I guess, like a TEPW. We're going to sit down and we're going to find out who's participating. What are all the goals and objectives of those individuals participating? What do they hope to get out of the exercise? Have we done this exercise in the past, and what were the outcomes of it? And you take all that in the initial planning meeting. And I think success of an initial planning meeting is broadly defined goals and objectives for the exercise. And then if you agree as a group on that, and then you agree that okay, some deliverables out of this initial planning meeting is we're going to come up with a draft measle or a draft exercise slide deck, or SITMAN, you might say, these are the deliverables that we'll come back to this group with, And then those products usually drive your final planning meeting, that you come back to the final planning meeting and say, okay, here's our measle, here's our SIPMAN, here's our, all those products we talked about. Does it meet your intents? And then hopefully out of the final planning meeting, you're just getting nods up and down that everyone agrees, wow, this is what we wanted. If you've done your due diligence and done the work, final planning meetings should just be confirmation and formality that we all agree with what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And generally we're going to have a trusted partner, maybe two, depending on how big the exercise is, from each of the agencies that's going to participate there. And we call them trusted partners because we don't want them to say anything. We don't want to give away the answers to the test and go back and say, hey guys, this is what we're going to do. Here's all the data and stuff. But we want to include them because they're going to be the ones to make sure. Because basically, as you said, with the measles master scenario events list, that's basically a script of a combination of the scenario and how it's going to evolve, / this is what their plan and policy say and what they should do and what we should see if there's no hiccups. And if we give that measles out, then basically we're giving away the test, and everybody's going to be able to follow real simply suited. So how do we go about making sure that these trusted partners are just as such that they don't give away the answers?
Well, I think it's in that first word, right? It's trust. I think you have to. I imagine that there are agencies or companies out there that conduct exercise that don't share. That just come, you've hired me to conduct this exercise, and we're going to conduct this exercise, and everyone's learning at the same moment. I just don't think that's effective. I think the trusted aspect or the trusted partner aspect of this is very, very, very important, because I think that final planning meeting where we're sitting here going, you know what, this is the measle we're doing, or this is the slide deck we're using for your discussion-based exercise, and then going through that and then seeing why you're inserting certain events or on the measle, or why you've asked certain questions on the discussion-based exercise. They can see the layers of nuance, the reason why we did it. You want to have that discussion. Well, hey, I'm bringing up pets in shelters because I want to discuss this, and this. I'm just bringing up shelter intake procedures because I want to be able to answer this, and this question. And then you're tying all that together to show them that you're meeting his goals or he or she's goals and objectives. Without that trusted partner to look at what you've come up with and agree with it, and you trusting them that they're not going to take it right back to their staff and go prepare for this, it works, right?
Absolutely. Now, Derek, does that mean that they can't say a single word about anything?
No, I mean, you're going to go into it knowing it's a sheltering exercise. This is this. And you're expected to go over, hey, so what's some of our policies and procedures given a scenario that could happen today for a sheltering exercise, so that you're current and up to date with whatever your policies and procedures say need to happen. But as far as the interjects and the little things like that are going to take place, they're not going to know that because that's going to give it away.
Well, I think that's a requirement, right? Mm-hmm. Because we've taken it to the next level already, that we've already reviewed the policies and procedures, operating policies and procedures, SOPs, whatever you want to call it. We've already reviewed all that, and we already know where the weaknesses are, and that's why we're asking certain questions. So if they haven't even bothered to understand what their own policy says, because that's usually how these things go. We'll put in an event in the measle, and we'll say, which is directly related to shelter intake procedures per se, and I'll say, well, do you understand what the intake procedures are? If the staff going through it don't already even understand what their present rules are, then you're in for a long day, right? Because then we can't even get to what's wrong with what you have written if you don't even understand what's already existing.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's 2 points I want to make about that is that, number one is, this is a teachable moment, and you can give away information but not give away the test answers. It's just like, I guess, like my professors at Campbell University did, is they generally gave you, a study guide your tests or your exams. Now, you couldn't study that and know that was all going to be on there, what the question was, how it was going to be worded, everything. But you knew that if you studied that stuff hard enough and compared it with working on your notes, you were probably going to do okay. You were going to have hiccups, you weren't going to make 100, but you'd probably be okay. And that's the same situation is we're telling them, hey, look, you're responsible for this, you need to study a little bit on it, but at the same time, we're going to be the ones that determine. And then that also gives us the ability as controllers to add those injects to where if we see that, okay, wait a minute, somebody has obviously gotten a hold of this, that's when we start sitting there. If it's a functional full scale, we start killing people or whatever, in the scenario. That's like, okay, obviously you knew too much. We're going to sit there and say, we had a hazmat exercise one time. And I believe that the first few people that arrived on scene may have had knowledge that if they got too close, they were going to be affected. So after a little while, we sit there and just said, you know what, that's fine. Y'all come over here. Y'all started getting sick, and now you're contaminated. That you still got too close, and everything. And it's nothing. It's no offense. I mean, because I think sometimes the hardest thing for us to get across to people, and when we do it as a company, and I think also internally, is the aspect of we don't want you to fail. We want you to learn, just like you said. But they get worried that our goal, and there are companies out there like that they want to make you look just as bad. Now, we want to be honest with you, but our goal is not to make you look bad. Our goal is to make you learn.
I think to your point, sometimes these folks clearly understand what their written policy procedures are, and they're comfortable with it. And then we can always, like you said, we can tweak the scenario and take it. Okay, these folks clearly know how to do their business. Let's add some more injects in here to put some stressors on them and see where it goes.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we got a few minutes left to go. Do y'all have? I know we could probably go on for this topic for a long time. Maybe what we need to do is come up with a podcast here in the next month or two where we talk nothing but about how we go through the process of designing an exercise. But do y'all have any kind of words of wisdom for the listeners?
I joked about it earlier. I would say one thing that traditionally everyone gets wrong is don't put that AAR improvement plan on a shelf and never look at it again until next year. I was always try to force yourself to pull it off the shelf and do what you said you were going to do. Absolutely.
Derek, anything?
I would say if you listen to this podcast and you still have questions or are interested about learning more, contact David Hesselmeyer here at On Target Preparedness, and we'll be sure to get you guys taken care of.
All right. We got, like I said, a couple minutes left. Let's just sum up with a couple things. So, obviously, you can probably understand that our belief is that HSEEP is a very good system and is not a requirement, but will definitely help you be better prepared to handle the response and recovery mode of emergency management. So, a couple things about where you'll find us. Next week, I will be at the South Atlantic Fire Rescue Expo in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'll be teaching my grant writing for emergency services class on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning, so you can find me there. We have really loads of exercises and classes coming up, so keep up with us on those. Also, I will be, myself and one other staff member will be at the North Carolina Emergency Management Association Conference in October at Sea Trails Resort at Sunset Beach. I'll be teaching on grant writing for emergency management agencies there, so definitely check us out. Give us any feedback for sure. Contact us at info@ontargetprep.com. Go like our Facebook page, On Target Preparedness. And definitely go and check out our website, ontargetprep.com, and we look forward to dealing and hearing from you. Thanks for everything, and have a good day.
This has been the On Target Preparedness Podcast with David Hesselmeyer. Please contact us concerning feedback, questions, or thoughts at info@ontargetprep.com or at 910-214-4086. Thanks for listening.